Hello and welcome to Legally Speaking with me, Tarun Nangia. The Supreme Court has ordered that after a political party announces the list of its candidates, after that very moment, within 48 hours, the list of all the criminal cases with their case numbers have to be put not only on social media, but also on appropriate media platforms, could be newspapers, could be websites, so that well in advance, people get to know that who is the candidate, what kind of cases he is facing, and why a political party has, in a sense, chosen for him to contest elections from that constituency. Why did the court need to give such a direction is also very important to know, because despite political parties having a lot of mature and well-intentioned leaders, we have seen increasing criminalization of politics in India. And finally, there was no other thing rather than the court to step in and issue orders and then clean up the system. I have a very eminent panel to discuss this with me. I have with me Advocate Arshdeep Singh Khurana. He joins me. I have with me Niharika Karanjawala from Karanjawala and Company. I have with me Advocate Gaurav Gupta. All of them have experience on the criminal side, both white collar as well as other criminal cases, including murders, dacoity, rapes. They have dealt with all these kind of cases, and they'll give us a fair idea on this issue. I'll start with Arshdeep today. Arshdeep, what do you make of this order of the court?
I think the order is extremely important in the current scenario. And just to give you a brief background, this issue had started in 2019 when the Constitutional Bench had come out with these directives that criminal antecedents had to be widely circulated and published. There, in fact, the prayer was that MP MLA should be disqualified if they have any criminal cases. But the Supreme Court didn't get into that. It said it's going to leave that to the wisdom of the Parliament, but passed these directions because there was increasingly we were seeing a trend where people with criminal antecedents were fighting for elections. So I think with that objective, these directions were passed in 2019, and then, of course, these were not followed in various elections, and then this led to a contempt proceeding. And in 2020, we had another judgment of the court where directions were issued that within 48 hours of selection of a candidate, you have to give out these antecedents. Today's order really has been necessitated because none of the political parties have followed the order, as is also clear from the order itself, and contempt orders have been issued. And the Supreme Court has really expressed his anguish on the failure of the political parties to follow this, and has therefore modified the order. So I think in the current scenario where we are seeing increasingly people with antecedents are getting into politics, this order is extremely important, and also gives an opportunity to the citizens to really look at the criminal antecedents of the candidates who are going to be fighting in the elections.
Okay, point well taken. It was Justice Rohinton Nariman and Justice Bhushan Goi who, in a sense, modified the order which allowed this to happen. Niharika, what do you think of this order, and why do you feel the court felt it necessary that this should be done?
So I absolutely agree with Arshdeep in the sense that these are some very important modifications to ensure and to force political parties to comply with the 13 January 2020 judgment of the court. I think one of the most important facets of this is the fact that the court has said that a mobile app has to be set up by the Election Commission of India that in one go provides you with the criminal antecedents of every individual candidate, because you have a situation where your electorate may not necessarily go about searching for facts on their candidates, and even if it is on the on the individual platforms, the individual websites, the fact that you have it all in one place on a mobile phone that a lot of people can have access to, I think will go a long way to ensuring that the electorate knows the candidates it's going forward to elect. I think that will make a huge difference. And I think that is one thing that will ensure compliance with the mandate of the Supreme Court.
Oh, that is a good point. The app is indeed something which will, everybody would love to download and read about their candidate, and also make their voting choices accordingly. Gaurav, the Supreme Court has taken this view, and now there is the app which Niharika told about. There is this 48-hour notice that within 48 hours you have to put. Do you think, Gaurav, that the political class somewhere failed to, in a sense, ensure that, credible people and people with a certain background and a certain qualification and a certain character come into politics, just because winnability then scored over everything else, and they chose anybody who could win. Do you think it is, in a sense, that the political class lost its way somewhere and the court had to step in?
Tarun, at the beginning of the show, you mentioned that the court had to finally intervene. I'd just like to add and say that the court has been constantly at it. And had it not been the good offices of our Honorable Supreme Court, we would have been in a much bigger mess. The Supreme Court has been relentlessly, along with other civil society groups, trying to infuse some sort of accountability, some measure of dignity to Indian politics. Unfortunately, we see none. The difficulty is they operate like a cabal. No matter how many good, well-meaning intentions that come from either the court or from suggestions from other transparency groups, civil society groups, the politicians as a society, as a cabal, find ways to either scuttle these good suggestions, judgments, delay them, try and find a way around it, be in contempt of it if they must. In fact, the mess is so deep and pervasive, Tarun, I must tell you, I was fortunate enough to work with retired Justice Ajit Prakash Shah when he was the chairman of the Law Commission. He gave a report on electoral reforms in 2015. And I assisted him on that report. I had the privilege of assisting him on that report. The extent of rot that is there in Indian politics, and I don't mean to sound very cynical, I don't mean to sound very critical. I also had the benefit of studying the transparency models of countries all over the world with regard to their electoral functioning. And believe you me, we sound like a medieval unit when we compare ourselves to even the smallest of the small European nations. But as you mentioned, for these people, the lesser the qualification, the higher is the chance of winnability. Qualifications really go out of the window. Can you imagine a person who is not graduated beyond third or fifth standard? He is in charge of the economic, legal, social policy of the country. Can he debate a bill? No, he can't. The entire fulcrum of the issue is who can win the election, who can put up the most money. But kudos to Supreme Court, kudos to Justice Nariman on the eve of his retirement. No matter what the politicians do and say, Supreme Court will keep on trying to do its duty to enforce constitutional principles of openness, accountability, and fair play.
Okay, point well taken. Arshdeep, taking on from what Gaurav is saying, we have, in a sense, descended at a level where rapists, murderers, and people of very dubious character have found their way into assemblies as well as the parliament. Now you see that the powers that be it any political party, tend to side with these kind of elements. Some have even become ministers. Now, the court now has had to step in to stem this rot. Do you think this will meet with resistance in the political class, given how entrenched criminalization is to the political class as of today?
Yeah, Tarun, if the conduct of the parties is to be seen in the last, from 2019 when the judgment first came out, and there is also a much more historical background to it. None of the parties have complied with the orders. And if you look at today's order, the Supreme Court has really expressed its anguish that there is no effort from the political class to deal with this rot, which is there in our politics today. And in fact, in 2019 itself, Supreme Court said, please bring in a law which will deal with people who have criminal antecedents, whether they should be debarred from joining into politics, etc. And they said nothing has been done in the last 2 years by the political class to bring in laws. And therefore, now they had to take this step. Twice contempt proceedings have been initiated. And today, in today's order, contempt orders have been passed against all major political parties in the country. And the violations are ranging from a number of issues. to issues where criminal cases have not been disclosed, to cases where the enough publication has not been given so there is evidently an effort by the political parties to overcome the orders of the Supreme Court. So that is very clear from today's judgment.
Okay. Gaurav, you wanted to come in with a point when he was saying you raised your hand.
Yeah, I also have a slightly different take on this question that you put to Arshdeep. Tarun, with all the greatest amount of respect to our Supreme Court, I don't think the politicians are likely to take this order extremely seriously or with a certain amount of caution that it deserves, largely because there have been similar measures, similar directions in the past, and not too much has changed on the ground. I would really like the Supreme Court and really urge the Supreme Court to use its powers of contempt to make an example of one or two politicians if it's really serious about seeing its decision getting implemented. Unless that is done, I really don't feel these people take it very, very seriously. I don't know how many politicians even read judgments of the Supreme Court. And leave alone that, I don't know how many of them even understand judgments of the Supreme Court. So unless you really make examples out of people for violating the judgments of the Supreme Court under their contempt powers, and unless you make an example out of one or two people, I don't see the situation changing very much on the ground. Although I must mention that after this entire slew of directions came with regard to disclosure of criminal cases, things have changed, but not changing at the pace at which one would expect.
Point well taken here. Niharika, when the Constitution was being written, and it was envisaged that this country will have lawmakers who will, in a sense, build a new democratic India. Initially, we had some good lawmakers in the initial years. I am sure there would have been no criminals in the first 2-3 parliament or even assemblies at that time. We started, in a sense, descending into chaos, as the decades passed by, especially the past 35 years have been, in a sense, very worrying. Lawmakers are somebody that vote and write laws for us. For them to be criminals and then for them to be illiterate and not, in fact, I in a sense feel sad at the tendency of celebrating many times people who have not even completed their basic education. Is this something that as a democracy we should worry that we celebrate? Can I celebrate that if I mean, it's not possible that if a judge is not from a good college, he's come from some background, a basic qualification is a LLB. He should have at least studied LLB to become a judge. He can't just be made judge like that. But lawmakers in this country seem to have no qualification.
See, Tarun, there's two sides to it. Now, as you mentioned with regards to the Constitution, of course, yeah, statutes are written with regards to the way things ought to be, and then times change, and you have to have judicial precedent and whatnot to deal with the way things are. Right now, part of the reason, there's a two-sided aspect to why so many politicians who are not qualified are celebrated. And from that perspective, you have to look into the fact that a large majority of your electorate doesn't have opportunities in education. They don't have opportunities to better themselves, to study. Very often people are sent to work very early. They simply don't have enough opportunities. And as a result, to see somebody like themselves in a position of power is something, it's very empowering for people, and people feel that they have a oneness with that candidate. And therefore, even if that candidate has their flaws, that is something one is able to look aside, right? Because one feels that that candidate will be able to deal with the problems that you face on a day-to-day basis. Now, the fact is, what we need to do is, and I think this order is the court's attempt to do that. The only way to move forward with it is to educate the electorate to look beyond populist measures, to look beyond people only telling them what they want to hear, and to look wholly to the fact that if these lawmakers are going to improve the ground situation, as well as in a lot of instances deal with foreign actors, deal with other decision making, then they need to have a higher degree of qualifications. It's only when you educate your electorate about these things, and only when groups like the election commission, and if political parties are so inclined, I doubt they will be, because I tend to agree with Gaurav and Arshdeep that political parties depend on winnability. Even a moral politician is going to think, look, I can't do any good unless I'm actually in office, right? So winnability is going to be their main point. But unless our institutions like the election commission take these active steps to show the electorate that what will benefit them and what will better them is a qualified and intelligent, educated candidate, and a candidate who is honestly working for the betterment of the people, nothing is really going to change.
Point taken. I will, from what Niharika explained, that feeling of oneness, that somebody from one among us has become this. People take pride in that. Even though he may not be qualified for the position or the department he is handling, we take pride in it. Many times such ministers ended up being guided by bureaucrats. So obviously, because if they don't know how to read a file, then of course they're going to be guided by someone how to do it. Gaurav, you made a very good point last time, and building on to that, I would like to ask you, any European nation for that matter, you don't see criminals as well as people who are not that educated in parliament, because essentially the job of a lawmaker is not easy. Do you think lack of education in our country and the literacy rate being so low hugely contributes? And unless, like China, we put in a huge amount in education, court judgments will only go up to a certain level.
Tarun, you've really stolen the words out of my mouth. I am a big believer and a big votary of putting all your resources, if not all, at least a bulk of your resources in three departments, which is law and order, public health, and education. I am an eternal optimist, and I feel that if you were to sincerely and earnestly take care of these three departments, things will take care of themselves. Yes, you're right. Poverty, social circumstances add to a lot, but it's not the only factor why we see so many criminals. And truth be told, Tarun, I'm sure you would obviously also know that many cases, at least a bulk of them, at least a third of them that are filed against these politicians are fake cases which are filed just on the eve of them either filling their form or to somehow try and get a conviction so that they are disqualified. And there is systemic rot within the police, the law enforcement agencies, and dare I say, even within the courts. So it's a combination of a lot of factors. The criminalization of politics is essentially an outcome of a lot of factors, and poverty, of course, is one of them.
Gaurav, this I discussed in one other show, that there is an increasing tendency that one party demits office, another gains power, and the opposite side is fixed in cases apparently. This happens in the states. It's been happening in the center now for decades. So this is a cycle. And I think somewhere agencies are complicit because they act like willing stooges in the hands of politicians. Ashdeep, you see the world of crime and white collar and other criminals up close. Do you think that this country, which is India, can't become a mature democracy unless we get out of this cycle of fixing politicians on the eve of elections, or also giving tickets to people who shouldn't be given?
Yeah, Tarun, this is actually a very complex and a real problem, where we see a lot of political cases happening on the eve of the elections or after the elections, during the tenure of a ruling party. And I think one of the problems also lies in our system, in our judicial systems, where false complaints are filed so easily, and action is not taken against people who file these false cases. Unlike the laws in other countries, where for a malicious prosecution or filing a false complaint, strict action is taken. So that is not seen in our country, and therefore people get away with filing these false cases, and some of these end up being having political overtones, and our agencies, etc., being used. So it is a real problem which we face, and I think the answer only lies in courts stepping up to that and really taking action against these false complaints.
Okay, point. One last question to Niharika.
Yeah, Tarun.
The judgment is already out. The courts have taken a tough stand. Really, in an ideal society, the courts shouldn't have felt the need to get into directing politicians to do this. Do you think that today's youth are, in a sense, in a capability to even digest these kind of judgments? Or do you think education is the reason why even this opportunity will be missed? I mean, the judgment is laudable, but will it be enforced is again in question.
I tell you what I think about it, Tarun. On the point of the enforceability of it, there's a certain section of society that will take the election very, very seriously. And this isn't divided into educated or uneducated. This is divided into people who genuinely take an interest in the political situation and people who don't. There are a lot of extremely educated people who simply are not that interested into the day-to-day ground political situation. This is going to bear fruit if people avail of these opportunities that the Supreme Court has put forward and are discerning in the way in which they are going to choose their candidates. That's why I mentioned the app earlier, because I think the accessibility of it, especially as you mentioned with the youth, might be a drawing point. A young person, if they are taking a small amount of interest in politics, if it's easier to access, will probably take that one step instead of taking 15 steps.
Niharika, that's a very good point to end the show. Everybody, people can, all these youth can download apps and start discussing about what. So I think that's a good beginning, and Justice Nariman and Justice Bhushan Gogoi need to be thanked for that.
Absolutely.
I would like to now thank Niharika Karanjawala, Gaurav Gupta, Arshdeep Singh Khurana for sparing time and joining us. We hope it was a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tarun.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.